The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sarah Pentecost with APA staff. Thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Our webinars are the fourth Monday of each month from noon to 1 p.m., and they cover different topics in the planning arena. This week, we have our first panel webinar presentation, and we have Dr. Robert Twilley. He's the Executive Director of the Louisiana Sea Grant College Program at Louisiana State University. We have Samaya Ben Millie she is a graduate urban and regional planning student at Virginia Commonwealth University. Gwendolyn Griffin, she is an undergraduate urban and regional planning student at Virginia Commonwealth University. Next, we have Jennifer Cotting, a research associate at the Environmental Finance Center at University of Maryland. And then we have Karen Firehock, lecturer, director, and co-founder of the Green Infrastructure Center at the University of Virginia. Once the webinar is over today, it will be posted to our YouTube channel. It's an APA Virginia channel, and we upload all of our webinars there for your viewing. Please mark your calendars for next month's webinar on July 24th. It is a legislative recap with Eldon James and Sue Rowland. Also, please refer to APA Virginia's website to see more about our upcoming annual conference, July 16th through 19th at Hotel Roanoke. Registration is open, and make sure you take advantage of our early bird pricing. That ends it ends on June 29th. And sponsorship opportunities are still available. All of that info can be found at apavirginia.com. And I'd like to just remind everyone, we'll take all questions at the end. You can type them down in the questions box, and if you could try to put the presenter's name at the front of the question, that way we know who to ask the question to. And we're going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Dr. Twilley.
Great. So just as a sound check, you can hear me all right? And let's see, I just clicked. Let's try this again. There we go. Good morning, afternoon. I'm going to talk about a project that we have funded through the Coastal Resilience Center that you see at the top of this first slide. This is a project that is, well, the Coastal Resilience Center is housed at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and it's part of one of the centers of excellence with the Homeland Security. And we've been looking at applying some tools that we have been developing here in the Mississippi River Delta here at LSU that we use to forecast storm surge and flooding. And the question I would like to pose to the group is, and one that we're asking ourselves is, how can we use these tools for planning, for design applications that can reduce repetitive loss during events? And one thing that we have here in Louisiana is a laboratory to look at flooding loss and the interactions of the natural and built environment that you see here identified with this image of the multiple lines of defense strategy for coastal restoration. And having multiple events, we've had 5 hurricanes now. We just had Tropical Storm Cindy since Hurricane Katrina. So we've gone through this scenario quite often, and we've seen infrastructure and landscapes respond. So, and it's not only the storm themselves and the frequency and that is what we've been testing. That landscape is a very dynamic and changing landscape as these different storms hit. Just to give you an example, The way I like to sort of pose this is the migration of the Gulf of Mexico landward. And basically that is the Gulf of Mexico to the left of this slide, migrating to the right. So it's the movement of the Gulf of Mexico inland toward these communities. It's not people moving to the coast, it's the coast moving toward people. And just to give you an example, from 1932 to 2010 in both Terrebonne and Barataria Basin, that migration has occurred 17 kilometers. And so even since Katrina, basically the Gulf of Mexico moves or is closer to these communities than before. So our question is how can we use storm surge forecasts to help planning and reduce repetitive loss in our coastal environment? And so let's try this again. There we go. So the issue is infrastructure and storm surge. And just to give you an idea of the magnitude of this is actually outdated. This is from the 2012 master plan. The potential for expected annual damages to reach 7 to 23 billion. And much of that is from flooding and damages due to hurricanes. And of course, this migration that I talk about, you know, I could spend a whole seminar on it, but basically it's the land is subsiding and sea level is rising, but more importantly, we don't have the capacity of the river with the sediment in that river to help build elevation to compensate for sea level rise and subsidence. And thus, those rates of 17 kilometers of the Gulf of Mexico migrating inland is also a big part of the way we manage the river, as in all deltas around the world. But those are the damages, those are the source of those damages. And so our restoration program is to build land with the river, sediment from the river, and reduce risk. Now, we have also dealing with flooding, not only from coastal storms, but as many of you know, from August. In fact, we're about to celebrate the anniversary of the flood of 2017, the Louisiana flood, actually a flood and a storm with no name. But we are also dealing with this interior. In the Gulf of Mexico, the point here is not only a source of flooding from storm surge, but we're dealing with the more interior flooding as an additional issue of reducing repetitive losses. And so all of this brings us to this tool, which is a visualization tool for storm surge. And we call it See the Storm Surge Before It Happens, which means this is a deterministic model of a specific storm. It is not a probability of multiple storms. It is very specific, and it can be, the track and the conditions of the storm can be manipulated to look at scenarios. And it's called SARA, which is a Coastal Emergency Risk Assessment. That is a visualization tool that I'm showing you to the left. And as you can also see in the bottom right, a lot of universities, a very large group has been involved in building this. A large part of this is actually the engine that runs the simulations of the storm surge, which is called the AdCirc Surge Guidance System, ASGS. That's in the background generating output that tells us the elevation of water at different locations in response to a hurricane or major event. Our visualization tool that you see here expresses that in Google Map so that you have some idea of where those water elevations would be located. And so it was developed actually to address the issue of critical infrastructure. It was actually designed over 20 years ago. Rick Ludick and Johannes Westerink at Notre Dame. Rick Ludick is at UNC Chapel Hill, director of the Institute of Marine Science, and built this AdCirc grid in this model, as you can see, sort of off to your left, to help predict what the winds and water conditions would be around New Orleans at these very important canal systems, 17th Street Canal. Now, the adsert grid that you see in front of you is important because each one of those dots represents what we call a node. And it is at that point that is calculated the water elevation based on the physical parameters of the storm. And you'll notice the density of those dots become higher and higher as you move onshore. In fact, around Lake Pontchartrain, it's a dense, dark cloud, which means those dots are very, very close together. It has very high resolution. And that's why this model has been so effective, is that it can, particularly in a coast like Louisiana, predict water levels around very complicated coastal structures and infrastructure and weirs and levees. And so it is proven to be very effective. Now, we have, since 2000, particularly Hurricane Katrina, we elevated this to where it became a coastal emergency risk assessment, and put a lot of time and effort into visualizing storms during the events, being able to predict water elevations 5 days out, again, to know the expected risk during a specific event. It is based on what the information we get from the National Hurricane Center, as you see to your left. It does rely, and we're able to do this because in 2005, the state of Louisiana, as many universities have been doing, invested in high performance computing. Think about it, those are 1.5 million nodes or points that we're calculating water elevations. And so it takes high performance computing to be able to generate the maps that you see to your right, which is the interface of predicting water elevations during an event. Now, the time is critical, and emergency managers want to know when when water levels will reach a certain height. And so we have spent a lot of time with emergency managers in developing this tool, again, to help them related to where people and infrastructure is located and planning during and actually right after an event. But what I want to talk about today is and well, let me make one quick point. Again, as you can see to your left, there's the ability to predict water elevations around a levee along Highway 1. And so you have this tremendous capacity, again, of spatial resolution of showing exactly the elevations under certain scenarios and conditions. And again, on the right, when that water level will reach that elevation. Again, very deterministic, based on very specific information on where the storm will be located and the wind conditions of that storm. And so, it has proven to be a very effective tool for emergency managers during emergency events. So the question is, how can we integrate this approach and create community resilience and designs using a tool like this and linking it with consequences so we can help with the design and enhance planning for the next event and in hopes of reducing risk. And can we utilize these tools for designing green infrastructure, for looking at reductions in water levels with the same storm event? So it's basically, this integration is taking a visualization tool, knowledge about where critical infrastructure is located and where you would put critical infrastructure, and on the right, can we link this to comprehensive planning to reduce repetitive losses? And that brings us to working with planners. So at LSU, we have the Coastal Sustainability Studio, which has been very much is located in our art and design, College of Art and Design, and is integrated with our College of Engineering and with the College of Coast Environment, where the Department of Oceanography and Coastal Science, where I'm located. And it is to try to bring these integrated designs, looking at planning and adaptation and hazard mitigation. And so the question is, with this group, what's the value of a tool that can deterministically tell you what are elevations. So it is taking the SARA model, which is the forecasting or the visualization tool, with the consequences of and data of where infrastructure is located, linking these up so that the feedback of where critical infrastructure can be inserted into these visualizations of flooding, and not only and help in planning, but also to help at the endpoint, which is for planners and users and emergency managers. Now, let me go back and real quickly say that I think the value of the SARA tool was because we spent so much time with emergency managers, and we found out from them, this is what we need during an event. So part of the discussion today is questions and comments, and is, from the planner or user, what is the value of these types of tools? I'm going to give you some examples. Now, before I do that, real quickly, before I wrap up here in the next 3 minutes, I do want to mention this starts with a very large data set of where is the critical infrastructure. And FEMA, we had a very large FEMA hazard mitigation grant. GOSIP is our Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. And it was these GIS hazard mitigation maps that we started with, and the question, and you can actually find the maps at this portal. And this is with the Stevenson Disaster Management Institute. So here we're taking some of the information of that critical infrastructure and overlaying it here with a hindcast of the Hurricane Isaac. And you can see potential impacts, people, homes, schools, businesses, nursing homes, hospitals that are influenced by different elevations during an event. I'm going to show you a little bit, scaling it down to actually St. John's Parish. We can actually look almost in neighborhoods to see, again, what different infrastructure would be impacted given different hindcasts to look at impact assessment. And so this is sort of the idea here, for example, after all of the design went into the levees and some of the coastal restoration projects, what if Katrina hit today? What are the reductions in water levels? Taking a storm that we know what damage it did in 2005, look at it post investment in all the resilience infrastructure that has been designed and built since 2005, and look at the flooding. And that's, again, the power of this tool, and looking at hindcast of these events and comparing them. And so, we actually give you another example, worked with a focus group, and one of their top issues was, for resilience, we need to know where surface drinking water intake locations. So we can look at different storm events and overlay those visualization tools where the intake locations are, to see if there's some design and criteria related to relocations and reducing repetitive loss. We took a port resilience index that looks at their various indices relative to how well they are prepared to manage storms, and we can give them situational context, and give them storms and give them maps and give them visualizations, so then they can look at that relative to what they are using from a community resilience perspective, and how well does it apply. We actually, again, here is Hurricane Rita at the port there in Lake Charles. And so you can give situations related to that incident, related to what resilience measures are being adapted around that port. And so, again, this green infrastructure or critical infrastructure, looking at ways to use a forecast tool such as this storm surge and put it more into the planning and design framework. That's sort of the goal that we have, and trying to look for and test resilience designs before the storms happen. And I'll stop there.
Hello, thank you all for attending, and thank you, Dr. Twilley, for your presentation. My name is Sumaya. I'm a grad student at VCU and previously an intern with the APA. And I'm going to talk about low impact development and some of the best practices for flood mitigation. And then I'm going to hand it over to Gwen, who's going to present a green infrastructure case study. So the overall goal of the low impact development approach is to increase retention of stormwater and to retain pollutants on site. And it is defined according to the Environmental Protection Agency as systems and practices that use or mimic natural process and result in the infiltration and evapotranspiration or the use of stormwater in order to protect water quality and associated aquatic habitat. So some of the objectives is to improve water quality, reduce non-point source pollutants, such as solids, heavy metals, bacteria, also to reduce flooding and increase property value as it brings urban design features that you will see in the next slides. So the first one would be green roofs. The green roofs that are proved to retain large amounts of rainfall, and they consist of a vegetative layer that filters and reduces rainfalls. Some of the outcomes and results of using green rooftops is to reduce urban heat island effect and also to enhance air and noise quality inside the buildings. And also it is considered as an aesthetic feature in urban areas. So green roofs are mostly effective in urban areas. And these are some examples of green rooftops. What you can see here is that it can be used either for housing or either for public or bridges and larger type of buildings. The next slide would be bioswales. And these kind of elements, they come usually in liner forms, and they are used to detain and convey stormwater. They are mainly effective in urban areas, but also in suburban areas. And this is another example of the use of bioswales in trail or even in the border of pavements. So this is another kind of low of LID, which is the permeable pavement. This is a durable and load-bearing paved surface. The goal is to reduce pollutant loads through infiltration and also to control runoff volume and peak flow rates. The materials are generally permeable stone pavers and porous alphat or concrete. Permeable pavements can be used in pavements around the roads, but also in the parking. And so that is why you can call it like green parking. It's because of the surface that is permeable and reduces stormwater runoff. So these are other examples of gravel pavement for permeability. Another example of LID would be the bioretention cell, also called as rain garden. These are vegetated depressions that retain water, and they are usually equipped with under drain, which is a concealed drain that lets the water through when it reaches the level of the drain. These kind of practices are effective in small sites, in urban areas, and in suburban areas, and also in parking lots. So these are other examples. So apart from the low impact development practices, there are also more practices that are applied on a little larger scale, such as the detention basins, which are designed to hold stormwater runoff and hold stormwater to slowly release it downstream. So this is a picture of the open space detention basin in the city of Frisco, and also another kind of landscape architecture, which is a theater in Redfern Park. We can also suggest green creek restoration, which is mainly used to maintain and restore natural stream flows, protect water quality, protect and restore wildlife habitat. Some creek restoration projects also incorporate entertainment or athletic activities. So the third practice would be the impervious surface reduction. So what we can see here is a green alley that was created in the city of Detroit. The green alleys and similar infrastructure can help increase homes' resiliency and also reduce the flooding and stormwater runoff in urban areas. So the overall objectives and benefits of green infrastructure is to reduce urban heat island effect, which consists of higher temperatures in urban areas, and also it affects communities and also the energy consumption in buildings, air quality. It can also be the cause of increasing wind and also the change of natural characteristics in an urban environment. The most negative effect of urban heat island effect can also be the increase of greenhouse gas emissions. So the second benefit of green infrastructure would be the improvement of air quality, restoration of wildlife and natural habitat, economic growth and investment through the creation of green jobs and the implementation of green projects. Additionally, we can mention the reduction of flooding and the improvement of water quality, and finally, the creation of healthier communities and better environmental quality in the urban areas. Thank you for your attention, and I'm going to hand it over to Gwen.
Hi, so I'm Gwen Griffin, and I'm in the undergraduate urban studies program at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I'm going to be sharing a case study pertaining to green infrastructure. So the case study I'm going to be talking about is one from Kansas City, Missouri. And their goal was to prevent flooding from after storms from the Middle Blue River, and then to reduce stormwater overflows. So the city, the Kansas City Water Department, along with their utilities department and their planning department, all got together and they created a pilot area to test some of the low impact development structures and best management practices. And it consisted of a 100-acre area within the city, and this project started in 2011. So a lot of the problems were repairing the sewer system and all the pipes underneath the ground, along with helping the water infiltrate slowly. A lot of those challenges came from the development within the city and how the sewer systems were set up. So a lot of the best management practices were kind of what Samaya just explained. They used a lot of different structures such as rain gardens, putting in more permeable surfaces, curb extensions that were vegetated. So the best part about this project was the community and public involvement. They were able to get the community involved to maintain some of these, the bioswales, the curb extensions within the neighborhoods, and the different rain gardens. Some of the practices and how they were able to get the public involved was meetings within the neighborhoods, going door to door, and then pancake breakfasts to get people out in the morning. And that's how they were able to talk about why it was important, how they can prevent flooding in their neighborhoods. So they were able to get a lot of nonprofit organizations involved in this project to help with the Kansas City Water Department in order to decrease the cost. So overall, the city ended up with a pretty good project in reducing flooding and leaking within the pipes. Right. Let's see. So next we're going to have Jennifer Cotting. I'm going to hand it over to her.
Great, thanks. I want to just start by thanking you all at the at APA Virginia chapter for the opportunity to participate today. Let me see if we can get it back to my opening slide here. I have what may be an ambitious amount of material to cover in my time slot, so we'll dive in here. It looks like there we go. Thank you. Perfect. So, as I said, I might have an ambitious amount of material to cover, so let's just dive right in. Just to provide a little bit of context. Let's see. There we go. To provide a little bit of context in case you weren't familiar with the Environmental Finance Center, I'm coming to you from this lovely building, Frankfurt Fieldhouse, on the campus of the University of Maryland in College Park. And while we're located here in College Park, we're actually a regional center, so we work with communities throughout the Mid-Atlantic, including Virginia. We are actually part of a network of centers, and we focus on helping communities figure out the how to pay component of their resource management priorities. The majority of our work centers around providing direct technical assistance to communities that are grappling with local priorities in some of the sectors that you see here. We also do a fair amount of work at the state and federal level to help assess how programs can be run more efficiently, or we explore the potential fiscal impacts of policy decisions. And that's, that's us in a nutshell. But specific to green infrastructure, as planners, you may feel like financing is sort of outside of what you do, but sadly, far too many really good plans, green infrastructure plans included, collect dust because no one thought about the financing strategy that would support implementation. So I'm sure I don't have to sell you on the benefits of green infrastructure from a planning or resource management perspective, but green infrastructure a green infrastructure approach makes a lot of sense from a financing perspective as well. It's so holistic in nature, and it can create efficiencies that will reduce implementation costs over time. You'll have benefits that serve multiple community priorities, provides opportunities to engage the private sector, and really just overall investments in green infrastructure tend to have a greater return on investment than investments in hard infrastructure solutions alone. In the communities that EFC has worked with and researched over the years, we've seen some common elements in the good green infrastructure financing success stories. And these were communities that looked beyond just putting in one-off grant-funded projects, and they looked at their green infrastructure goals and program more generally, and started with planning and the support of local leadership. And that was followed by a great deal of, Gwen mentioned the value of the outreach and collaboration that's involved. And that leads to engagement of the broader community, as well as local ownership, full local ownership of that green infrastructure plan. And that's all very important. And we'll talk about a few examples from our work and research. We'll talk at surface level about a number of different types of financing components. I'll mention that the graphics that you're about to see in these slides are actually condensed versions of a collection of green infrastructure finance infographics that we have available. They're on the EFC's website with reference material that backs up all of the data points within the infographics. And that way you can take a deeper dive on the specific items that are of interest to you. So, successful green infrastructure programs and a plan may not sound like a financing mechanism, but really it's a really important cost-saving tool. And successful green infrastructure programs really tend to start with a plan. And from a financing perspective, we like this because a plan will guide decision-making around limited resources. So it really helps with resource allocation and making sure that limited investments are focused only on the activities that advance that shared vision in the plan. So places like Spokane has this integrated clean water plan. Pittsburgh has their greening the wet weather plan. You know, these are plans in communities that are the result of a consensus-driven stakeholder engagement process that's really important, and it looks at how green infrastructure fits into broader community priorities. And it's that plan, that shared vision, and making sure that investments are holding up investment decision-making to that shared vision to make sure that those resources are being invested in something that really, truly does help achieve the goals in that plan. We find that leadership, and this might be another no-brainer, but we find that leadership is important as well. Having that local champion, whether it's an elected official or a really respected person at a nonprofit organization, or whether it's just a general community member, having that champion that's motivating change and maintaining engagement and keeping momentum moving, it's really important to the implementation of green infrastructure plans. We found that the communities that we've worked with also tend to lead by example when they're starting implementation of their green infrastructure plans. They're implementing on public property with public dollars, and it almost becomes, these demonstration projects almost become an outreach tool for helping the community understand green infrastructure and the value of green infrastructure. Tucson, like many cities across the country, is making green infrastructure the norm by looking at existing capital projects and plans and looking for those opportunities to incorporate green infrastructure practices into the designs of roadways and parking lots and right-of-way projects. And when these cities and localities are looking at incorporating green infrastructure as early as possible in the planning process, it means you're going to have, it's going to be much more efficient, and you're going to the cost will be much less than trying to retrofit these practices into plans down the line. Good green infrastructure finance also looks to leverage multiple financing mechanisms. That diversity in the collection of financing mechanisms supporting your green infrastructure programming is going to create some stability, so that if there's a funding program that sunsets, or if funders or foundations or government support starts to shift priorities, then your program isn't completely stalled or undermined. So communities are leveraging their public dollars and they're incentivizing private investment. They're using their financing strategy. It tends to be a collection of cost-saving strategies, revenue generators, mixes of grants and taxes and fees, and partnerships and other ways of reducing costs. And that gives that opportunity for stability and in implementation in a way that delivers amenities to long-suffering neighborhoods and attracts private investment that can help revitalize local economies. So making sure that you have a good mix of financing mechanisms is really important. The holistic nature of green infrastructure also opens up a lot of opportunities for communities to collaborate with their neighbors, collaborate with other partners they might not otherwise work with. And this is, as you can imagine, this is good from a resource perspective, right? Because watersheds don't follow jurisdictional boundaries. It's really good from a financing perspective as well, though, because doing this kind of partnership and this kind of collaboration expands capacity of the local folks who are trying to implement, particularly local governments when they're trying to implement these green infrastructure plans. This opportunity to collaborate expands capacity, provides access to resources that might not otherwise be available, and just overall provides the opportunity to reduce the burden to the municipal government alone, or to any one stakeholder implementer alone. So communities are using green infrastructure as a vehicle to formally and informally, and sometimes, in some cases, formally coordinate efforts across multiple localities, state agencies, academic institutions, nonprofits, other stakeholders. And it just provides a manner of implementing green infrastructure plans in a way that would be more efficient and cheaper than everyone going it alone. Again, Gwen mentions the value of communicating with various audiences, and outreach is a really critical component to good green infrastructure, successful green infrastructure plans. And that's outreach and communication with a variety of stakeholders, whether it be elected officials or the general citizenry, or more targeted specific stakeholders or market segments. It's really, the outreach and education is really important, because from a financing perspective, folks are not going to be willing to invest in something they don't understand the value of. So it becomes very important to be able to articulate the benefits of green infrastructure, particularly because green infrastructure delivers so many different types of benefits. It's important to be able to articulate the one that is of greatest relevance to the audience that you're in front of at the time. So, for example, in Norfolk, where tidal flooding occurs even in the absence of storm events, successful messaging had to focus around the need to better manage and adapt to water quantity issues. In other communities, it might be open space or recreation or heat island mitigation that fits the resonating story. Or on the heels of Dr. Twilley's discussion of risk, sometimes the message that resonates is the potential cost of not taking action, and that's one that I think we see resonate with elected officials quite a bit. For some communities, particularly the communities that have been doing green infrastructure for some time now and have had it in place, and they can point to some real data on impacts of being able to, and they're able to talk about, as a result, they're able to talk about green infrastructure in terms of cost savings of gallons of water diverted from the treatment system, or increases in the jobs supported by the green infrastructure industry, particularly the operations and maintenance side, or expansion of property values. These can all become really compelling arguments for community support of financing strategies for, and as well as for engaging the private sector in your green infrastructure implementation plans. And then finally, engaging the private sector becomes really important. So finally, there's only so much that localities can do on public property to address green infrastructure priorities. So it becomes really important to be able to engage the private sector more fully, to more fully or efficiently achieve your green infrastructure planning goals. Communities have incentivized private sector engagement in a number of ways. Some have looked to cost share and credit and rebate programs for private property owners who put practices in on their own properties, on their own parcels. Some communities have used tax incentives to encourage businesses to locate and target areas and to go above and beyond what's already required of them, and install specific types of green infrastructure practices that will deliver community benefits. And Gwen also mentioned the value engaging the private sector in whether that be volunteers or other types of stakeholder groups, faith-based community, to be able to engage them in the stewardship or the operations and maintenance of some of these facilities that can be very valuable and reduce the financial burden to the localities. And then I thought I would talk about a couple of things that we've seen growing trends in. And one of the things that I think is going to continue to be a growing trend is communities are getting really creative in their use of the state revolving funds, the clean water and drinking water state revolving funds. And these are funds that come from EPA, flow down through the states, and then down to localities or traditionally they've funded hard water infrastructure, like wastewater treatment plants and the like, to do upgrades for water quality. But increasingly, communities are looking to, communities are looking to these state revolving funds for green infrastructure, how to integrate green infrastructure into their overall infrastructure, water infrastructure systems. Spokane, by way of example, was able to borrow $600,000 upfront funding to support the installation of rain gardens, impervious paving, and other water quality BMPs. Half of that was in the form of a 20-year low-interest loan that they're able to pay off over time with their stormwater utility. The other half was in a forgiven loan, so they didn't have to pay that back. It almost operated as if it were a grant. And the value of this is, localities are able to get the funding that they need up front to put these kinds of plans and projects in place and pay it off over time, rather than being limited in what you can do from year to year based on the revenue streams that you have available. So that can be really valuable. Other states like Ohio and Iowa have programs that actually let hard infrastructure, like a wastewater treatment plant, sponsor or fold into their application a green infrastructure project that, and they're incentivized to do that because they get a lower rate on their loan, and that so they're not actually spending any money. They're just folding that project in, and it's getting done. And the incentive to them is just getting a lower payback on their loans. We're also seeing green infrastructure in the bond markets now, and the District of Columbia, I think, is the example that most folks point to. They issued the first 100-year municipal bond for water and wastewater, and the 100-year term is really important because it allows for the distribution of that upfront money that's needed to do the green and gray infrastructure upgrades that are needed. They're able to spread the cost of that out over time so that you have folks who are benefiting, future benefiters are paying well into the future, as opposed to just relying on your current ratepayers to cover the cost of all of this. So you're getting at those future benefiters, which is really important. And this is obviously a part of a suite of financing mechanisms the city's using. They have a first of its kind credit trading program in the city that's engaging the development sector in investing in green infrastructure in the city. And then they also have $100 million in ratepayer fees that will be also invested into green infrastructure. So again, that idea of leveraging multiple types of financing mechanisms in your plan. And then finally, we're seeing a real uptake in the interest in regional approaches to green infrastructure and water quality, particularly in smaller regulated communities that are struggling to figure out how they're going to have the capacity and the funding available to meet their regulatory obligations on their own. We're seeing it a lot in specifically the work that we're doing in Pennsylvania. We're seeing lots of different clusters of communities now looking at how to take a regional approach. And again, it makes a lot of sense given that watersheds, as we said earlier, don't follow jurisdictional boundaries. The infographic that we have is from Long Creek, Maine. It's a really interesting case that you might want to look into if regional approaches is of interest to you. There was definitely a regulatory driver, but they've developed a collaboration around a shared watershed plan and a shared regulatory permit that offers opt-ins for all sorts of municipalities as well as private property owners, because they're finding that collaborating is going to be much more cost-effective than having their own permit. And there are some credits available for participants that manage water on site or do maintenance, take on maintenance responsibilities for facilities. So it's incentivizing that private sector engagement. Okay, so I'm going to stop and take a breath. I've covered a lot of material here. Hopefully you don't feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, but my hope is that if you saw or heard something that was of interest to you, that you would give us a call, and I'd be happy to go into more detail on any of these ideas. Or you can pop over to our website and take a look at the green infrastructure map that we have, where all of these infographics are available and all the data points are backed up through references. So with that, I guess I'll kick it over to Karen from the Green Infrastructure Center.
Thanks very much. And I'll just wait for a second while they turn control over to me. I know that we are actually short on time, so I'm going to go pretty fast. But just as a reminder to everyone who's listening, these slides will all be available for you guys to download later. So if I have to go too quickly through something, just you can watch it at your leisure later. So here comes the controls. Okay. So I'm going to be more like a butterfly. I'm going to flit through a variety of key points related to green infrastructure planning in an effort to provide, I guess, a little bit more of a big picture view. And I'm going to talk very specifically about trees as green infrastructure. Okay, so what is green infrastructure, why it matters, using trees as green infrastructure, and partnering for solutions. So our center is a not-for-profit. We're located in Charlottesville, Virginia. So to the Virginians on the phone, hello. We also work across the country, but we were started here. And we work on a variety of different topics, but mostly what we do is we map natural resource assets for communities, whether it's at the regional scale, the entire state. We also do counties, cities, towns, and sites. We teach courses and workshops, so that is why I'm also teaching at the University of Virginia. We do a lot of research, and we also help communities create specific plans and strategies. And I'm not going to cover everything I know today. Fortunately, I wrote a lot of it down in a book called Strategic Green Infrastructure Planning, a Multi-Scale Approach. And in that book, I talk about the fact that we need to think at different scales and be able to think from the site up to the landscape and back again. So if you're interested in this topic in more depth, it is available from Island Press. So we have many projects across Virginia, and I'm focusing on Virginia today because the webinar organizers asked that I do so since this is for Virginia planning. But for example, we're working in Norfolk, Virginia on resiliency planning using a green infrastructure strategy. We have worked in Buchanan, Virginia. These are just examples. We've done dozens of projects, but in a small town, helping them link tourism to their natural resource assets. In Hampton, helping them think about revitalizing the downtown by creating a more walkable community. And in Richmond, Virginia, which is our longest running sort of urban pilot, where we've mapped the entire city and then also have installed specific habitat restoration projects in the city to demonstrate how you can go from a city level planning to site specific solutions. So just quickly, I just want to take a step back and talk about infrastructure for a moment. We all know what gray infrastructure is: roads, power lines, pipelines, all the things that lead to civil society. So when we're talking about green infrastructure, not gray, so gray is on the left-hand side here. Green infrastructure is literally the green stuff: the trees, the wetlands, the lakes, all of the natural services, the natural resources that provide services for us. So on the right-hand side, we add the tree canopy, and now we've got a key component of our infrastructure that's helping keeping our cities cool, creating oxygen, taking volatile organic compounds out of the air, providing shade, and also uptaking stormwater. So the term green infrastructure actually comes from Florida, and for those of you who may not know this, in 1994, state employees and folks working on a river conservation program came up with this term to try to explain to the governor that the natural resources of Florida were also part of their infrastructure. And when they talked about it, they were specifically talking about resources like Lake Okeechobee, the Everglades, the River of Grass, the wonderful forest in the Panhandle, the beaches, the dunes, all of these natural assets that create a healthy community and a healthy economy. In 2006, so the EPA actually started calling everything green infrastructure. So previously, we referred to all these various best management practices as bioswales or Filterra boxes or green rooftops or permeable pavers as best management practices that used in concert create a low impact development strategy. And so now everyone got confused. Are we talking about trees and dunes? Are we talking about bioswales? What are we talking about? So the way that we look at it is we refer to natural green infrastructure and then constructed green infrastructure. But I want to remind everyone that trees are the original green infrastructure. And why I bring this up, just very quickly, I work a lot with developers every day pretty much. And working with a nonprofit developer, they're very excited about their site plan because they told me that it had lots of bioswales, so it was going to be very green and I would love it. I asked them where the bioswales were going to go and they said, well, here, here, and here. But first we have to cut down these trees because they're in the way. Now I'm sure everyone on the phone, I hope you're rolling your eyes at this point because we don't want to cut down trees to put in best management practices to try to replicate what the tree did. And in that particular example, they did realize that actually we should keep the trees. So I really like to harp on this because it's really important to first protect our natural resources. Trees give us all of these benefits first before we start constructing things. And also, trees are tremendous for stormwater management. We don't have to construct them, we can plant them, but a mature tree can take up anywhere from 760 gallons to 4,000 gallons per tree per year. And you multiply that times all the trees in a city, that's a tremendous benefit. It also means less flooding. So, the key is right order thinking. Protect your trees and natural vegetation on site and across the landscape is step one. Build in the least impactful manner, smallest parking lot possible, smallest building footprint possible, and then mitigate. So first conservation and then mitigation. And again, we ought to talk about that because we see so many site plans where they've removed all the natural infrastructure and then try to reconstruct what they've destroyed. So if we preserve as much on site first, we don't have to spend as much mitigating. So we also are very concerned about how much green space are left in individual development sites. And here's an example of 3 sites where each person left some green space. But if you notice that green space does not connect, you can keep the land connected, but only if you plan at a larger scale. So here we have, if we've mapped our green infrastructure ahead of time, we know about our river corridor and our riparian zone and our buffers. Perhaps the site on the left is low or little in development, or it's a preserve, a conservation easement, or a park. In the middle, moderate development, and on the right, high-level development where you have room to accommodate it. But in order to do that successfully, you've got to have a map. And that's why it's really important that your community, your city, your county actually create a map ahead of the development so that we can realize these benefits. So trying to think about a connected landscape, there are lots of tools and models, whether you're in the urban region or whether you're rural, to create a map of your largest intact landscapes and their connecting corridors. In Virginia, at the state level, there's a model available called Vanilla, Virginia Natural Landscape Assessment, and that has a map of all the largest intact habitat corridors, the sort of larger landscapes of 100 acres or more. And then if you're in another state, we actually built a model for Esri in the past year that you can go to and download the data for your state for anywhere in the country. And so you can just Google, don't try to write down that web address, but Esri Green Infrastructure. And you'll get to that model, and it's a pretty neat tool. And again, the data were created so that you could have them for free. But there are many planning applications to this work. We talk a lot about stormwater management so far today, but lots of reasons to do this work, whether you're doing park and open space planning or heritage tourism, trying to figure out the most strategic places for conservation easements, road planning, etc. Comprehensive planning is obviously something that most of us, I think everyone on the call does, but it's really important to make sure that your comprehensive plan has really good data in it. Oftentimes I find very bare minimum maps or just transportation maps, but often not good maps of natural resources. So think about how to get those involved. And also think about the fact that this work can also help you with compliance with total maximum daily loadings of pollutants, TMDLs, if you have to figure out where you need to be most strategic in restoring, or stormwater programs. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So forests really help us with a lot of benefits. Again, the natural green infrastructure, American Water Works found that a 10% increase in forest cover can reduce treatment costs by up to 20%. So trees actually give you cheaper water treatment because the water arrives cleaner to your drinking water intake or your reservoir. Also, urban canopy values, people actually spend more and shop longer when there are tree-lined shopping districts. So it's worth investing in those street trees because they'll pay you back in tax revenue. Job development. So people are always talking about they need more jobs. Well, it turns out that if the greener your community, the more likely you are to attract green jobs to your community. And again, my talking time was cut by the panel being a bit behind, so I'm having to talk a little fast. Sorry. Trees for health. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are many, many, many benefits of having a green community. And so another key avenue is working with hospitals and healthcare providers to help them green their campuses, as well as large corporate complexes. So the greener the environment, the less crime, the healthier the people, etc. Okay, and then real estate values. You guys all know this. Having a park closer to your development, of course, increases the value of those developments. So parks give you a better tax base, but it turns out that the larger the park, right, the larger and more natural it is, right? So more so than golf parks or skate parks, trees will actually protect your values. So there's a lot of reasons we need better information. I think we're just about out of time on this webinar. Unfortunately, I only had 8 minutes. So I'll just say that there are a lot of different things that you can evaluate for urban forest canopy, but that is the first step in trying to understand how well your trees are working for you in absorbing your stormwater. This is an example of Charlottesville, where I'm talking from now, just looking at gray infrastructure, adding in the canopy and the green infrastructure. Then we can actually start to understand where our nodes are, our most intact resources, how they connect. We can add in our trails. We can actually add in the pathways across and figure out the green streets and the nodes that connect the people. So sort of creating these green threads throughout the city and looking at how well canopied and shaded those streets are. And looking at ownership, stream buffers, how well buffered those are. We can also look at entrance corridors and how well those are greened, how well those trees are helping with stormwater management. We can look at public and assisted housing as well. That's getting into social equity, because I find in cities mostly the public housing sites are not very green and not pleasant environments to be in. You can also play with your parcel data and start to throw in metrics on what's important. So I don't expect you to absorb this right now, but red is the least benefits and green is the most. And this is something like that Jen Cotting would get into. But you can actually weight your parcels for which are most important economically. Then you could play with public health and re-rank your values for what's important for public health or for environment. And then you can even stack all those values together to see where you get a triple benefit, triple bottom line. Trees are really important for stormwater management, as I said, and I'm just going to flip through to the end here because, again, I think my time is out. But the question is, how do we make cities work like forests? And so lots of ways to add buffers, but they don't work without stormwater management. And I'll just end on this slide because, again, we're out of time. But we actually have a grant from the Forest Service to work in 7 southern states in 13 cities, and in Virginia, that's Norfolk, Harrisonburg, and Lynchburg, and we are calculating the stormwater benefits of the trees. We're looking at sea level rise, we're looking at habitat restoration, and we're also looking at building resilience. And the key takeaway point from that is that oftentimes the solutions to the stormwater problems and coastal flooding is actually upland, where the areas are more impervious. And as I said, in the interest of time, I'll end with that.
All right, so thank you everyone for sticking with us. See if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in. We'll still take questions for Jennifer and Karen and Dr. Twilley. Samaya and Gwen have stepped out, but if you have any questions for them, feel free to send them into our Facebook page. You can find us on Facebook at the Virginia chapter of the American Planning Association. And I can get those answered and post them on the YouTube channel. And with the presenter's permission, I can also post their individual presentations, links to them. That way, for those that were cut short, you can download and see the whole presentation. And I will just wait a minute, see if anyone has any questions. Then I want to also thank everyone for joining us today. And this is our first panel webinar presentation. And I think that it went really well. So thank you for joining us and sharing your lunch hour with us. And let's see, I don't see any coming in. So I think that we'll go ahead and wrap this up. If you think of any questions, feel free to send them in to our Facebook page. You can message us or comment or make a post on our page, and we'll get those answered for you. And then again, this webinar will be posted in 24 hours on our YouTube channel. You can find that under APA Virginia. And again, our next webinar is Monday, July 24th. It's the Virginia Legislative Recap with Eldon James and Sue Rowland. And thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.